Welcome, welcome everyone. We'll get started shortly. We'll just give folks a moment to arrive. Welcome everyone to today's NMRC Research Board webinar. We're so glad that you all are joining us today. I know some folks are still rolling into our meeting, but want to be mindful of your time. Please share where you're joining us from in the chat, introduce yourselves. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining from. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm the research manager at Mentor National. I'm joined by my colleagues, Ada Silverthorne and Kelly Stewart from the University of Illinois, Chicago. They'll be helping with our webinar today. Today we'll hear from Dr. Manolia Tanyu about tailoring mentoring to youth needs. Before we turn it over to Dr. Tanyu, we'll just talk about a few logistical pieces before we start. So during our webinar today, please post any questions that you have in our Q&A. We'll try to address those questions throughout the presentation, but we'll also have time at the end to make sure that we get your questions answered. Please use our chat feature, as many of you are already, thank you, to just share your reflections throughout the presentation and also share resources with one another. After today's webinar, everyone will get a copy of Dr. Tanyu's slides, and that will also include a link to a very brief evaluation that we hope you all will fill out. Our webinar is being recorded today, and that will be posted to the NMRC website, so you can refer back to that for any refreshers after today, or maybe share with any colleagues of yours that were not able to join us. So without further ado, today it is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Manolia Tanyu. She is a senior researcher at the American Institutes for Research and a member of the National Mentoring Resource Center's Research Board. Today, Dr. Tanyu will be reviewing findings from the Mentoring Enhancement Demonstration Project. So that project was focused on learning more about mentoring activities when mentors are paired with youth with higher needs. Dr. Tanyu will share more with us about how often mentors focused on these kinds of needs, the role of program staff and caregivers in shaping mentoring activities, how mentors focused on addressing these needs, and balancing kind of the skill building piece with, of course, fun. It is mentoring after all, so that is important. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Tanyu. Take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm not seeing the slide. There we are. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I was looking at all the participants who have joined us so far, and we are all over the country. And I'm not sure if anyone has joined us from other regions, but we are a very diverse group looking at who has joined our conversation. Before I start sharing, talking about our research, if we can move on to the next slide, I will introduce our team soon. But just a disclaimer, the development of these materials was supported by a grant awarded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, Office of Justice Programs, and U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in the materials and in their presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Department of Justice. So webinar objectives. In this presentation today, we would like to share with you findings from a research study that we conducted, and we just completed that. We used a large data set from an experimental study that ended in 2018 and commissioned by OJJDP. The large data set collected from 30 sites across the US provided the opportunity to continue to learn from it. So when in 2022, National Institute of Justice put out a solicitation for youth mentoring research, we responded to it to conduct this research that I will be talking about. During the time we have together today, I would like to provide the background that led to our study, and we'll share a little bit about the original study. I will then talk about our thinking that led to this current study. I will share about our findings and
Manolia, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're in presenter view for the slides. Kelly, are you able to switch that over?
I'm sorry about that. Let's see.
So I'll just continue.
Yeah, please continue.
But as researchers of on youth mentoring programs and practices, it is very important to us to hear your insights and reactions to what we are sharing with you. Our goal today is to bring the research information to benefit your work with youth and families, while we also benefit from your insights to inform future research. So we are a very large crowd. We have more than 400 who signed up at least for the webinar. I'm not sure how many of us or how many of those people will join the call, but that limits our opportunities to have a chat. But we are really looking forward to have an engaging conversation, and we will do our best as a team to look at the chat and the Q&A function. So this is an engaging study, engaging webinar. We were just talking before we started the call how, when you don't put up your video, your camera, when you don't turn on your camera, there's, like a lot of multitasking. Some you might be joining, with your pajamas or you might be multitasking at other things, but feel free to put your reactions, your questions in the chat box, so we can also hear from you and how you are thinking about the findings that I will be talking about. Next slide, please. I would like to introduce our study team. Our research was a collaborative effort across 18 months. It included a research team from American Institutes for Research, shortly AAR, with me as the study lead, Roger Jajura as the senior advisor, and Mark Lakovich as the data analyst. AR team worked very closely throughout this time with 3 youth mentoring scholars, and I'm sure you're familiar with their great work. I would like to introduce Carla Herrera from Herrera Consulting Group, who's on the call today, and you see her on the camera. Also joining us is Dr. Tom Keller from Portland State University, and also Sarah Schwartz from SOFA. So the 3 of us today, hopefully we will be able to respond to any questions or any thoughts you have on the chat box. Next slide. So before I talk about our study, I would like to share with you the resources that we put out there. We created a technical report and a practice guide that we already published. And I know Rachel will be putting in the hyperlinks so you can access them. But let me just go through them very quickly. As the name tells, the technical report is detailed and provides information on our research questions, methods, and analysis. Our practice brief is intended for program staff and mentors. And we hope we were able to share in this brief a few nuggets that you might find useful. You can find both of these resources on Office of Justice Programs website and also on AR's website. So just to make it easier, if you go to American Institutes for Research's website and type in my name, and also search for Tailoring Mentoring, our project summary page should pop up. And you can also find our technical guide or the practice brief that you can download from there. Next slide. Acknowledgements. I also would like to acknowledge a number of individuals who helped us in this research study. First, starting with my colleagues in AR, Lauren, Pete, Amy, and Kelly. They all contributed to this project in different phases of the study. Barbara Tatum Kelly, a retired grant manager, and Audra Thomas from NIJ, who helped us with different parts of the grant throughout the 18 months. And I definitely need to contribute the practitioners who supported our practice brief. So just to give you an overview, the practice brief that hopefully you might be looking at was a collaborative effort with a diverse group of program administrators and practitioners. We used a three-phase approach to put together our practice brief. First, you might be familiar with the Summer Institute on Youth Mentoring that has been going on for the last 15 years at Portland State University, facilitated by Dr. Keller and funded by Mentor USA and Mentor Canada. At the Summer Institute this July, I was very fortunate, and I had the honor to be a presenter and share our initial findings with a group of 30 practitioners and researchers, and we gathered feedback from them on our findings. So we then took the findings, the feedback that we gathered from them, and drafted our practice brief. And then we invited a group of individuals to review our draft and give their comments. And then after that, we also had a 60-minute conversation, a Zoom conversation with them to talk through and dig deeper to capture their feedback. And that helped us finalize our practice brief. So with that, I would like to acknowledge also Rivu, a mentor from Friends of the Children, and his mentee, Steve Witt from Friends of the Children, Mike Geringer from Mentor, Evan Hubbard from Silver Lining Mentoring, April Riordan from Boulder Options Youth Mentoring, Andre Thaddeus from Connect to Greatness, and Susan Walsh from Friends of the Children, and again, Steve, who was a mentee. I think their perspectives really made our practice brief very relevant to practitioner needs. Okay, so let me switch now to talking a little bit about the original study that led to this study. Some of you might have heard about the mentoring enhancement demonstration program that was funded or commissioned by OJJDP in 2012. This was a 6-year of undertaking, and OJJDP funded 10 collaboratives that comprised of 30 existing mentoring programs. Each collaborative in this demonstration program proposed a set of program enhancements to their existing training and ongoing support for the mentors to promote mentors' use of teaching and advocacy in their interactions with youth they were matched with. So the evaluation of MEDP was a partnership between AAR and our collaborators, Tom Keller, Carla Herrera, Janet Forbush, and David Altschuler from Johns Hopkins University. At that time, MEDP was one of the largest mentoring evaluations to date, following over 2,000 mentoring matches across 30 mentoring programs nationwide. So it was a very large study and a lot of effort to conduct the evaluation. Next slide. So if you might be looking at our slides, on the screen, you see a map of all the studies, all the programs that were funded through MEDP. They were across 12 states, and as you see, they were all dispersed around the country. And then they also showed a lot of different formats, structures. They included some programs from Big Brothers Big Sisters, 4-H, as well as smaller sites, smaller agencies that focus on youth mentoring. Most mentors were community-based, but some of them were also school-based. A lot of them were the program sites were in urban or suburban areas, but there were also some in rural areas. They also served kids with different race and ethnic backgrounds. But the most common thing to all these 30 sites was that none of them had specialized services designed to address the needs of specific youth. So in other words, they served youth with a variety of needs and risk factors. So the data set that we looked at, and I will be talking about today, includes matches from non-targeted friendship-based programs to assess how mentors in these relationship-focused mentoring programs across the country are approaching their work with youth. And the data set we collected through MEDP included survey responses from mentors, youth, and caregivers that captured their experiences on a variety of topics across the mentoring relationship and program practices. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, MEDP was a large-scale study, and it was an experimentation of the idea that when mentors receive focused training and support provided to them to take on a more targeted approach in their mentoring that focuses more on teaching and advocacy skills, they will have positive relationships with mentees, and that will lead to stronger positive outcomes for youth. So that was the premise of our study. And the conceptual thinking that guided MEDP at that time was informed by a meta-analysis by David Dubois and his colleagues, a very well-known researcher in youth mentoring field, and his comprehensive analysis of a large number of published research studies that showed that when programs guided their mentors to use targeted approaches such as teaching and advocacy, they led to better outcomes. So you might be wondering, what is teaching, what is advocacy? Let me share a little bit about that. Teaching. So you might think about teaching in mentoring relationships. For example, teaching table manners to a young person or learning how to swim. So these are all examples we heard from mentors in the program. Mentors can also capitalize on teachable moments to share knowledge or practice skills. Thinking about advocacy, I see a chat. Yeah, I see a question, but I think Rachel or Kelly, you might be able to address that. Advocacy, you might think about functions where mentors are doing outreach, for example, going to a school and talking to the mentee's teacher, or helping the mentee advocate for him or herself, or encouraging the mentee's interest in activities. So in our evaluation of MEDP, we used a randomized control trial study design. A function of this is random assignment of youth to the intervention group or the comparison group, assuming that so the youth were either randomly assigned to be either in the intervention group with a mentor who received the enhanced program practices that the programs proposed, or they were assigned to the business as usual group where the mentor received the typical program training and support without the enhancements. What do we find? So with regards to youth outcomes, our analysis showed that youth outcomes in the two groups, so the intervention and comparison group, did not differ statistically. In other words, the study enhancements did not show statistically significant direct positive or negative effects on mentoring relationship quality or youth outcomes. With regards to mentor practices, there was no indication that mentors in the intervention group demonstrated significantly stronger advocacy and teaching roles. In other words, our analysis did not show that mentors who received the enhanced training and program supports from the programs were overall stronger mentors. But we found some moderating effects. So that means the things that influence the relationship and the outcomes. When mentors had experience in helping profession, for example, working with the youth in any capacity, 10 hours or more a week, and they were exposed to the enhancements, so more enhanced training and program supports, we found that they had stronger relationships with youth who were matched with them, and the youth also showed improvements in a variety of outcomes we looked at, including conflict management, positive effect, help-seeking skills, problem-solving skills, and fewer conduct problems. So we definitely saw that there was a linkage between relationship quality and the stronger the implementation, the stronger the outcomes. But with respect to program implementation across these 30 sites, we also saw a lot of variation in how the programs implemented their enhancements. In general, mentors in the enhancement group received higher levels of training and support, which is what we expected and what we wanted to see. However, there was a lot of variation. So now coming back to our current study, the evaluation of MEDP has ended, but the large data set allows us, it's a treasure box to dig in. It allows us to continue to look at it and learn from the matches and the experiences they shared in the surveys that we collected. So in the meantime, since 2018, we have continued to collaborate with researchers and published research studies in journals. But with this current study, the practice brief is also a way for us to continue to share this information with the practitioners, hoping that the information, the research will also support the way you're thinking about your mentoring and mentor support practices. Okay, next slide. So why this study? Youth mentoring research is at a turning point. Many large-scale rigorous studies, such as the evaluation of MEDP, show only small to moderate effects. Some youth may benefit greatly, other youth may not benefit at all in the measured outcomes that these studies are looking at. However, youth mentoring is still a vastly popular intervention strategy, right? That's why you are here on this webinar today, because you believe in it. You know that when a youth who has needs is matched with an adult, with a volunteer, we know that, and we all bring the heart that we will be able to see outcomes. But it also, like the findings that we are seeing in these large-scale studies also show the diversity of the needs that the young people are bringing to these mentoring programs. And then also thinking about the diversity of the approaches that the mentors are taking as they are interacting with the mentees. So that's why some researchers started questioning that maybe traditional non-targeted models are not the best way, and we should also try to support mentoring programs to take more targeted, more tailored approaches as they are working to support the youth with different types of needs. At the same time, researchers also started thinking maybe we need to assess and examine these youth mentoring outcomes and relationships in different ways. And instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach, maybe we need to look at the youth needs more specifically to look at how mentoring relationships are supporting youth with different levels of need. So this brought us to our thinking and the question that we asked, what outcomes do we see when we examine individualized mentoring practices focused on specific youth needs? And when mentoring programs use strategies that are intentionally responsive to youth-specific needs, could they yield to stronger positive outcomes? So this brings us to our study and our research findings that I would like to share with you today. There's a question, has religious exposure in mentoring being examined? I know some studies who have looked at that, but in this study, we didn't really focus on religious exposure. I will be in the next slide or in this slide talking about the domains or the needs that we looked at more closely. Okay, so in this current study and in the next minutes, I will be sharing with you our findings to these 5 questions that we wanted to examine. And I'm also sharing on the screen, on the slide, the conceptual model that we tested in our study. So I will read you the questions. Are youth coming to these non-targeted mentoring programs with significant needs? How do mentors tailor their activities to different levels of need? How do mentors determine whether and how to tailor their activities? How is responsive tailored mentoring associated with relationship quality? How is mentoring tailored to youth needs associated with youth outcomes? So
yeah, Before we go on, we've got a great clarifying question for you to talk about. Can you just quickly kind of define the basic difference between a targeted and non-mentoring program before we kind of dive into findings?
Sure. That's a great question. And I will also invite Carla and Tom to chime in if they would like to. If you are familiar with the Big Brothers Big Sisters approach, that's a non-targeted program where kids with very different types of needs might come to the program looking for a mentor. So these types of programs are accepting or recruiting kids that might be from, like coming from different backgrounds, bringing different risk factors, and they're not targeted such that maybe they, like some targeted programs could be only working with youth who are maybe justice involved. So maybe they have been justice involved for serious delinquent problems, and the mentors they are matched with are trained to specifically target those types of needs, versus the non-targeted programs. They are more attuned to kids' basic needs and focusing on providing the relationship as a protective factor to support the youth with the different needs, thinking that when the youth are in a strong, supportive, caring relationship with an adult, they will eventually work or improve a variety of different needs that they might have.
Yes, I would add too, Manelia. So there's targeting, and you did say this well, actually, but there's two different types of targeting, and both were here. One is it's a program that works with specific youth that have specific needs, and the other is it's a program that takes a specific approach to dealing with those needs. For example, a tutoring program or a program that works with cognitive behavioral therapy, or and targets that to a specific need, a specific child. So it's both, I think. So yeah.
Thank you.
And it could be taking children with a variety of backgrounds and needs, but it's focusing on a particular thing, like an arts-based mentoring program where, all of the activities revolve around developing artistic skills. So that's, again, there's a real focus either for the population of youth you're working with or what your program is trying to accomplish. And it's very clear to everybody that this program is addressing, that particular topic.
Yeah, I think that was a great clarification question, because the findings that we will be talking about will be specific to these programs that were non-targeted in their approaches. So the findings with a more targeted program might also be different, and that's also part of our discussion too. I'm not looking at the Q&A. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, there was a question about the original MEDP study not finding statistical difference on youth outcomes, but yet stronger relationships and positive outcomes. So it's just a factor of that we measured a lot of different outcomes. So there were some major outcomes. Again, this study was funded by National Institute of Justice, OJGDP. So looking at youth behavior outcomes, delinquency outcomes, we didn't find differences, but we did find that the mentors in the intervention group were more likely to do some of the teaching and advocacy activities. So we were seeing that the intervention led to some differences in what the mentoring activities might look like or what the relationship might look like, but that wasn't enough to translate to some of those behavioral or delinquency outcomes, at least in the time frame that we had to see what effects there would be. So it was on the right track, but it didn't show what we were ultimately hoping to see.
And there was also the reason why we took a more focused approach to look at a smaller number of youth here that I will be talking about, who are bringing different levels or different domains of need which we're not able to look more closely in our original study. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. The current study, as I mentioned, was funded by National Institute of Justice, using surveys that we collected in the original study, the MEDP study, from mentors, youth, and their caregivers, and using surveys that were administered both at baseline and then at follow-up. So by baseline, I'm talking about the surveys that we administered prior to the start of the mentor-mentee match, and then at follow-up about 12 months after the match was made. And then we used a survey data set collected from 1,741 MEDP matches, and we only looked at those community-based matches where we had surveys from the mentors, the mentees, and their caregivers, and did not include the ones from site-based or school-based matches because those matches were not asked, so the parents of those matches were not asked to take the survey. And we, thinking about the non-significance that we found in our original study, we thought that we would compile all the matches from both the enhanced and business as usual group. And in terms of demographics, the matches in the study had been meeting on average a little under a year, so 344 days. Youth were on average 12 years old. Mentors were on average 30 years old. Close to half of the youth were Black, followed by white, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, and other. And then most mentors were white, followed by Black, Hispanic, Native American, and Asian. So I will share a little bit about the measures that we used. Remember that our study examined already collected data. So we had to review existing surveys and identify which measures or items would best serve our needs and allow us to examine our research questions in the conceptual framework that I shared earlier. So first, we wanted to identify how we can measure youth needs. And we were focused on 4 domains. Rachel, if you can actually take us back to slide 11, let me just talk a little bit about the conceptual model. Yeah, so here, I just wanted to highlight, our thinking. We wanted to see how when the mentors, when the youth are coming with 4 domains of needs, so emotional, behavioral, social, academic, do they focus, are the mentors more likely to focus on the youth needs? So that's what the blue box that you're looking at on the screen. And when the mentors had this focus on the youth needs, would we see improvements in the youth needs at the follow-up time? So that's the purple box you're looking at. We also wanted to see if the focused mentoring or the focus on the youth need will have an influence on the youth asset. So with that, we were interested in looking at self-worth and future orientation. So those are the youth strengths or youth perceptions of themselves and how they look at the future. There were also some effects that we wanted to measure, so some moderators. So we used the tailored mentoring, the mentor focus as a mediator, thinking that we wanted to examine if the change from baseline in the youth need, from baseline to outcome, would be mediated through the mentor's focus. But we also wanted to see some moderator effects to see if there was any influence on how the extent to which mentors would focus or the extent to which youth would improve on the outcomes. So with that, we wanted to see if there was any effect of mentor characteristics, program practices, or an effect of the caregiver involvement or the mentor-mentee relationship quality on the youth needs and outcomes we wanted to test. So with that, if we can go back to slide 14 and how we measured youth needs. So we measured, in terms of measuring the behavioral, emotional, and peer relationship problems, in our surveys that we collected, we had scales from the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. And we considered that these will give us the information we are looking for to assess the youth needs. If you may not be familiar with the SDQ, this is a validated tool that is used in over 100 countries. It's a screening questionnaire for emotional, behavioral, and relational problems in children and adolescents aged 2 through 17. The version that we used asked the caregivers, so the parents, how they considered the problems of their children. And then caregivers were asked to rate from a range of not true to certainly true. So if you look at the screen, there were 5 items for each of these problems. So for conduct problems, for example, one question, one item asked often loses temper, and the caregiver was asked to rate from not true to certainly true. If you think about emotional problems, one example that you see on the screen is often unhappy, depressed, or tearful. So that was an indication of an emotional problem. For peer relationship problems, one example of the 5 items is generally liked by other youth. So with all these 5 items, these were combined and added to create a score that measured the level of conduct problems, emotional problems, or peer relationship problems. SDQ considers a score of 0 to 3 as average, which describes about 90% of the population. So according to SDQ developers and validation measures, a score of 4 and above in conduct problems is considered clinically high level. A score of 5 in emotional problems and peer relationship problems is considered clinically high level. And we wanted to see in our studies, in our finding that I will be sharing, we wanted to see how the youth with high levels of needs are actually doing in the relationship, in the mentoring relationship, when mentors had high focus on these youth needs. Moving on to the next slide, we also measured the academic need, but this came from our youth surveys. So youth reported their academic performance, a 4-item measure that reflected their academic performance. And we asked them to rate themselves on math, reading, social studies, and science, whether they thought they were doing academically not good at all to excellent. So this was from a range of 1 to 5, but we recoded the scale to match the grade point average, so 0 to 4. And then we calculated an average grade for each student across, or each youth across the 4 core academic subjects. And as you can see from the mean, so when you look from baseline to follow-up, there was a slight reduction in youth grade point average. But in general, more than half of the youth had a self-reported GPA below a B average of 3.9. Okay, so moving on to how we measured the mentor focus. In our mentor survey, if you can move on to the next slide. In our mentor survey, there were 16 items that asked mentors to what extent they focused on those practices. And we considered 4 items that aligned closely and helped us to assess the extent to which mentors would focus on the youth needs in those domains that we wanted to test out. So in the behavioral need, we identified the question, to what extent have you focused on this activity? And the mentors were asked to rate their focus, their level of focus on this item, decreasing my mentees' negative behaviors to help us assess their focus on the behavioral need. For the emotional need, we use the item that asked the mentors to what extent they focused on decreasing the mentees' worries, fears, and anxieties. For relational need, we use the item that asked the mentors to what extent they focused on strengthening their mentees' relationship with peers. And then for academic need, we use the item that asked mentors to what extent they focused on helping their mentee with academics and schoolwork. So to measure the youth assets, so self-worth and future orientation, we used scales from other studies that assessed youth self-worth. An example of the scale item might be, I am as good a person as I want to be, or I wish I had more to be proud of. An example for future orientation is I have goals for my life, or I know what I want to do for a career or job. The moderators, so the influencers of the relationship or the strength of the relationship we wanted to look at. For mentor characteristics, we used one item that asked mentors in the baseline survey whether or not they had a paid or unpaid role helping a youth for 10 or more hours a week. For program practices, we used program documents that looked at whether the program made the matches based on youth interests or youth needs, and also the number of hours of training they received. For the relationship quality, we looked at sense of closeness, conflict, pressure, criticism. For caregiver involvement, we looked at parent level of satisfaction. Okay, next one. So as I mentioned, we also looked at relationship quality and used different scales or items to look at this, to assess relationship quality. So I've been sharing a lot and talking a lot. Let me stop here for a few minutes and to have the opportunity to hear from you. We would like to launch a poll now for a minute to hear from you. So Rachel is going to launch a poll now. And we would like to know, how are you currently identifying mentee needs in your programs? So we will take about 60 seconds or less to look at your responses to see how you are thinking about identifying mentee needs. So I'm watching the responses in the poll. It looks like most of the participants ask youth and caregiver a set of questions during intake. So they're asking both the youth and caregivers, and fewer participants say that they have either a structured assessment, or very few are using validated measures during intake. So it looks like it's more an open-ended conversation. I think, Rachel, maybe we can just take a few more seconds before we close it, thinking about the time. Looking at the chat box, not everybody is seeing the poll. I'm not sure why. Rachel, should we close the poll?
You should see our results. It looks like the majority of folks are asking youth and caregivers a set of questions during intake.
Yeah, and looking at the responses, about half or more than half, it's more like it's not as structured, like using a structured assessment or a validated measure that you are using during intake, but more maybe during the conversation during the intake, you're asking both the youth and caregiver for what the needs of the youth might be. Thank you for sharing. Well, maybe I'll just switch now to talking about findings. Okay, now comes the interesting part that you have been waiting for. What did we find? The first question we want to talk about is, are youth coming to mentoring programs with significant needs? So remember that we were just talking about this. The MEDP study did not target youth with specific levels of need, but did serve youth with different levels of these needs. So there was a lot of diversity in terms of youth who came to these programs. Of the 1,741 youth we included in our study, most of the youth did not come to the program with significant levels of behavioral, emotional, social, or academic needs. But there were still some kids who presented high levels of needs. And that's really the focus of our presentation today, too, to what extent the mentors focused on these needs. So if you think about these kids with lower levels of emotional, behavioral, relational, or academic needs, these might be, as we mentioned, the kids who have low levels of risk and their parents are maybe looking for a friendship with an adult who can serve as a role model and expose them to opportunities that they did not have otherwise. But on the other hand, as you see on the slide, we even though SDQ studies or studies that use SDQ are reporting that in about 10% of the population, we typically see youth with high levels of needs. In our study in MEDP, there was a considerable number of youth who came to these programs with high levels of needs. So 29% of the youth, based on their caregivers reporting, were identified as having high levels of needs. So the clinical levels of needs based on SDQ. 27% came to the program with emotional needs, 24% with behavioral needs, and about 19% with the academic needs. And we also found, based on our analysis, some of these kids had multiple needs, right? So if some kids who brought about 11% of the youth in our study, in our poll, had both behavioral and emotional need. About 30% of the youth had both high levels of academic need. I mean, among those kids who had high levels of academic need, some of them, about 1/3 of them, also had other types of emotional or behavioral or relational needs. So as you might know from your program experiences, some of these kids bring multiple levels of needs that we are expecting mentors to work on or to address. So let me pause here for a second and invite you to think about this question. To what extent are you preparing mentors to work with youth who have high levels of needs? This might be particularly critical if your program is non-targeted, as we discussed, but you are working with youth who have high levels of needs, and to what extent you are thinking about providing supports and trainings to these mentors who are expected to work with youth who have high levels of needs. Next slide. So moving on to our next question that we examined, are mentors tailoring their activities to address specific youth needs? About 12 months after the start of the mentor-mentee match, we asked mentors their level of interactions with their mentees. So remember that I said we asked in our mentor survey, we presented 16 items and we asked the mentors to tell us to what extent they were focusing on these practices that you see on your screen. And we looked more closely how the mentors who are matched with with youth who have high levels of needs are reporting to us, and whether they are different from mentors who are matched with youth with lower levels of needs. So we found that regardless of need, so if we are not thinking about levels of youth need, mentors focused a lot on helping their mentee feel happier in general, or help their mentees feel better about himself or herself, which is probably aligned with your experiences, right? The purpose of the mentoring relationships in the programs is to provide relational support to these kids. And if you see on the screen, as you see on the screen, helping my mentee with academics and schoolwork was the least likely activity that the mentors focused on. So the numbers that you see on the screen is the average numbers, and to what extent the mentors told us that they were focusing on these activities. But then when we look more closely and we looked at what types of activities the mentors are telling us that they're focusing on when they are matched to youth with high levels of needs, we saw that in general, when mentors were matched with youth who had high levels of behavioral need, they were more likely to focus on that need when we compared them to mentors who were matched with kids who have lower levels of need. The same with mentors who were matched to youth with high emotional problems or with academic problems. We did not see that type of difference for relational needs. So the mentors who were matched to youth with peer problems did not seem to focus more on strengthening their relationships or the mentees' relationships with peers. Maybe peer problems were the exception because mentors did not have the opportunity to observe their mentors around their peers, or maybe they have felt that a different approach will be more effective in addressing peer relationship problems. But we also wonder what this means for program administrators and staff, because mentors first have to understand what those needs are. Then they have to decide whether to try to focus on that need and what strategies they will need to do to focus on the need. Then they actually have to implement that strategies in their interactions with their mentees. And these are all the things that you could be talking about, or maybe you're already talking about it in your trainings and one-on-one interactions with the mentors as you're supporting them. So hopefully we're sharing some thoughts or some findings that are useful for your thinking as you are guiding mentors in your programs. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's talk about how mentors determine whether and how to tailor their activities. In the mentor survey, mentors were asked to share how they decided to focus on the youth needs. And we asked them to select any option that applied to them. We wanted to know if the mentors determined that this was an important thing to focus on because the agency staff told them to do so, or maybe the mentee's parent asked to focus on this, or maybe they simply noticed that this was a need. So mentors who were highly focused on youth needs most commonly relied on their own observations. As you see on the slide, 2/3 of the mentors with high focus, 68% of them, told us that they were influenced in their decision on how to focus on the youth need based on their own observations of their mentee. Nearly half of the high focus mentors were influenced by the input of agency staff or requests from caregivers. Less than 1/3 of the mentors were influenced by their training, so the training that they received initially. And to fewer extent of the mentors, they told us that they were influenced by the youth, or this was a decision that they made with the mentee themselves. So a question for you that I have is, to what extent is the youth voice guiding the decision making, the mentor's decision making in the relationships, in the mentoring relationships? Let me just make sure I'm following the chat. Okay, so I see some responses here that the mentee, you have semi-structured interviews, you do surveys, and the mentee are deciding together, the mentee and the mentor. Okay, so moving on to our next finding. How much do mentors focus on youth needs? We also looked at when mentors were matched with youth with high levels of needs, to what extent they said they focused highly on the youth need. That means to what extent they said, I focus a lot or most. Among youth with high levels of need in a particular area, about 1/4 of their mentors focused on that need to a considerable degree. So remember that we used specific items, and to identify high mentor focus, we looked at those mentors who said, I focus on this a lot or mostly. So these findings suggest that even though the youth might have high need, the mentors are telling us that this is not their primary focus all the time. About 1/3 of the mentors, or close to 1/3 of the mentors, are really emphasizing these youth needs, these specific needs, in their conversations a lot or most. There are likely a variety of reasons why mentors did not always focus on specific youth needs. Perhaps many mentors look for the right time to have reflective conversations that focus on the youth need to avoid pressure and conflict in their relationship, as they're working on building rapport. Or maybe mentors might have focused on other more pressing needs that were not measured, that we did not measure at that time. Maybe mentors felt that focusing on broader aspects of well-being, like making their mentees feel better about themselves, was the best way to approach their need. And young people themselves might have encouraged a focus on fun activities, right? How many young people want to talk about their conduct problems and to what extent they're getting in trouble in school, but they rather play basketball? So there are different reasons we could be thinking about as we try to understand why only 1/3 of the mentors said this was a primary focus of their conversations all the time. It's also important to note that matches in this study had been meeting about a year when we assessed these responses. Many mentors maybe wanted to take more focus in their first years on developing relationships and try to stay away from focusing on the youth needs. And maybe this is why we are seeing these results. And as we know, many non-targeted programs may encourage their mentors to really emphasize relationship first before they can start working on the problems. So we hope future research will benefit from exploring these tailored approaches in longer term matches, and also continue to look at these targeted approaches. Thinking about our time, let's launch another polling question. We would like to ask you, how are you working with your mentors to help them tailor mentoring around their mentees' needs? So are you letting your mentors decide how to tailor or how to focus on the youth needs? Are you sharing your assessment tools or your intake questions to guide the mentor? Are you a targeted program, maybe matching the mentor and the mentee based on the needs that are identified? Is your program targeting youth with specific needs and only using mentors who are skilled to address those needs? Seems like we have a variety of responses. I'm just looking at the polls. Now we have a comment. It's a little bit of everything. Yeah, some programs might be using everything. Some programs might be more targeted. I'm also seeing some responses that not everybody is seeing the poll, and I'm not sure why. But looking at the more than 100 responses we have received so far, about 1/3 of you are reporting or telling us that you match a mentor based on the youth need identified through the intake assessment. So it seems like you're doing a targeted matching. Thank you. Maybe we can close the poll, thinking about our timing.
Thank you for sharing that. I was always curious about whether programs were communicating with the mentors about what had been learned in the assessment. Seems like that's not a very common practice. It allows the mentor to learn with the youth what they should be doing.
Yeah, and I think this is a good discussion question, right? To what extent programs are helping or working with the mentors? Are they letting them figure out once maybe they had a chance to get to know the youth and the family, or are they sharing some information about the mentee right away to guide the behavioral interactions? Okay, so now I will be talking a little bit about the relationship quality and the outcomes, the mentee outcomes that we found in our analysis. As we all know, relationship quality is a core element in program-based mentoring relationships. So in our study, we wanted to see how in those matches where youth presents high levels of behavioral, emotional, and academic needs, and the mentor tells us that they focus highly on those needs, so a lot or most, how the mentor and mentee experience their relationship. And the reason I'm showing only the 3 domains here is because we didn't, at least like our analysis did not show that mentor focus was associated with youth relational needs. So that's why we chose just to look more closely on these 3 domains. So behavioral need, emotional need, and academic need. Is tailored mentoring associated with relationship quality? This slide might be a bit dense, so let me explain what you are looking at. We are only presenting on small group of youth with high levels of need and comparing how the match experienced their relationship when the mentor had high focus versus lower focus on the youth need. And to look at their experiences with relationship quality, we examined mentor satisfaction, mentor and youth sense of closeness, youth perceptions of criticism and conflict, and parent satisfaction. So here's what we found. Interestingly, high focus mentors felt closer to their mentees and were more satisfied with their relationship than mentors who did not tailor their interactions specifically in this way. So it looks like mentors as adults who are committing to working with a young person, they get a lot from their relationship, even though they might experience some challenges in their relationships. On the other hand, youth with high levels of behavioral needs reported significantly more criticism and conflict in their interactions when their mentors had high focus. So what does this mean? When the mentor is focusing a lot on maybe fixing the problem, the conduct problems, and talking a lot about it, youth who has high levels of behavioral needs or conduct problems is experiencing conflict and criticism in their relationship. But we did not see that with academic need. Youth with high academic needs experienced less criticism in their relationships, and they felt closer to their mentors when their mentor focused on their academic needs. Perhaps youth experienced conversations about schoolwork to be more empathetic and empowering because it was less about themselves and more focusing on grades than those aimed at changing their behavior. Maybe that's the difference that we're seeing that could have implications on relationship quality. Let me note that although positive associations between a focus on academic needs and relationship quality are intriguing, they do not indicate whether youth asked for help in academics because they felt closer to their mentor or that they felt closer because they received this help. So we didn't look at, like, we didn't really measure specifically which came first, but this is really helping us understand a little bit more how the mentor and the mentee are experiencing their relationships and telling us about their relationship quality when they have different types of needs and the mentor is focusing at different levels. Next slide. Okay, I have now 2 slides that I would like to talk about outcomes. Is tailored mentoring linked to positive outcomes? Remember that we measured 4 different domains: behavioral needs, relational needs, emotional needs, and academic needs. And we found significant associations for 2 domains specifically that I would like to talk about: the behavioral need and academic need. We did not find significant associations for the other ones. So looking at relational need and emotional need. In other words, the thing we really wanted to answer is, when there is a youth need and mentors focus on these needs, do we see improvements 12 months after the match? Our study yielded mixed findings on the effectiveness of tailored mentoring, depending on youth need. So more specifically, tailored mentoring was associated with gains for youth with academic needs, but not associated with improvements for youth with conduct problems. So what do I mean by that? A tailored approach seems to be effective when mentors tailored activities to their mentees' academic needs. And when the mentors focused on that need, their GPA showed better improvement at follow-up, compared to mentors who did not tailor their activities in this way. When it comes to thinking about academic need, we also found a moderating effect of youth closeness. So we found that high focus mentors boosted youth's grades more when youth felt closer to their mentor. But this was the only moderating effect that we found having a significant relationship or significant influence on the model that we tested. We found also that high focus mentors, just to unpack again, we found high focus mentors boosted youth's grades when youth rated their relationship as closer, which supports arguments that relationship quality matters in mentoring. But when we think about behavioral needs, so the conduct problems that we measured, contrary to what we expected, mentor focus on behavioral needs was not associated with reductions in youth behavioral need at follow-up, so 12 months after the match. Mentors actually showed increased behavioral need at follow-up than when mentors the mentors who did not tailor their approaches in this way. Let me caution you that our study or our analysis are not causal. So we cannot really tell, because we measured the mentor focus and youth outcomes at 12 months at the same time, we don't really know if the youth need caused by the mentor focus or the mentor focus was caused by the changes in youth needs over time. Because we measured them at the same time. It is also possible that behavioral needs are more difficult to address within the 12-month window of our study. So maybe they are often interrelated with many other experiences and needs, and may take more time to show improvement compared to the positive outcomes that we were able to find with the academic needs. Okay, and then thinking about the assets that we measured. Moving on, so to the next slide. We found improvements in future orientation when mentors tailored activities to support youth academics and schoolwork. But then not with the self-worth. Self-worth declined when mentors tailored their activities to the youth's misbehavior. It may be important to consider how tailored mentoring in different domains might require very different mentor skills. and how the different types of mentor focus might be perceived differently by mentees. For example, volunteer mentors may be better equipped to provide academic support to their mentors than to address conduct problems, unless they are really trained to do so. So reminding you again that these were non-targeted programs that we looked at to better understand how the mentors are responding when youth is showing high levels of needs. And as I mentioned, addressing youth conduct problems and behavioral needs might be harder to address in the 12 months of the study period, and how we measured youth outcomes in our follow-up surveys. It is also possible that the conversations that the mentors are having with the youth when it focuses on conduct problems may be perceived as unsupportive or threatening, which may harm how youth feel about themselves. And that's why we're seeing this effect, the negative effect on self-worth. And it may be counterproductive in shaping the relationship quality. And you might also think maybe this is not the case if you are running a targeted program where youth are coming to your program with specific needs, when you are supporting and training mentors to focus on these specific needs, or recruiting mentors who can bring these specific type of skill sets to addressing youth behavioral needs. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left. Let me just sum it up and share with you what I have shared so far with you. And please share your questions, your thoughts in the chat box. We don't have the unmute function, so we can hear from you, but we would love to hear your thoughts and your reactions to all these findings that I shared with you so far. So just to sum it up, a considerable portion of the youth in non-targeted mentoring programs that were in the MEDP study have substantial needs that may need targeted supports. Most mentors do not tailor their interactions to focus on the specific needs that we assessed. However, they are more likely to do so when the youth's behavioral, emotional, or academic needs were high. Mentors relied on multiple sources to determine their approach to addressing youth need. They most commonly focused or relied on their own observations, which is telling that a lot of mentors are trying to figure out what the youth needs are as they are interacting with the mentors over time. But to some extent, they also rely on the agency staff and the caregivers to help them decide what to focus on. Mentors who focused on the needs of their mentees felt closer to their mentee. So there's a lot of research looking at youth mentees, but maybe we also need more research and understanding how mentors are experiencing the relationship and benefiting from the relationship, because as we see in our findings, mentors felt satisfied and they felt close to the youth, even though the youth not necessarily felt that way in the first 12 months based on our analysis. Because youth with high levels of behavioral need experience more conflict when the mentor focus was high. So really understanding relationship dynamics might be key to better understanding the outcomes that we hope to achieve with these mentoring programs. Thinking about the outcomes, mentoring tailored to academic needs was linked with improvements in future orientation and improved GPA. But in contrast, mentor tailored to behavioral needs, so the conduct problems that we assessed, had negative associations with self-worth and youth conduct problems at follow-up. Tailored mentoring may be more effective for some youth needs, as we are learning from our findings, our analysis. And for tailored mentoring in these programs to be effective, the circumstances may need to be right. For example, when academics are the pressing youth need, or when the match has had the right time to establish a strong relationship so the youth feels close to the mentee, so they are more willing to take on the mentor's focus on their help with their conduct problems, or maybe when achieving a goal is valued by the youth and caregiver. So these are all thinking points as you are supporting the mentors and the mentees in your program. So I would like to wrap up here with a few limitations or cautionary points. Remember that our study included non-targeted programs. So findings are for mentor-determined tailored mentoring within non-targeted programs. So not necessarily program-determined focus on the youth needs. In the study, we defined tailored mentoring as focusing a lot or most on specific youth needs during mentoring interactions, and effective tailoring may differ depending on the youth needs. Both youth outcomes and tailored mentoring were measured at the same time point, so in 12 months after match started. So when we are talking about our findings, we cannot determine whether the use of tailored mentoring closed or was caused by the changes in youth needs over time. And it is also possible that behavioral and emotional needs are more difficult to address, as I mentioned, in the 12-month period, as we assessed in this study. And future research maybe needs to think about more follow-up studies to look at youth outcomes that we might capture through mentoring programs. I don't see any questions, so let me know if there are any questions that we have received. I don't see anything in the chat box that we should be responding to, or am I wrong?
You're right, Manolia, no questions unanswered.
This was a long time for you to stay in this webinar, so we appreciate your thinking, your timing, the time you gave to hear more about our research study. Please connect with us. We don't have the contact information at the end of the slides, but as Rachel mentioned, in the follow-up email, you will receive our email addresses. Tom, Carla, and I, as well as other team members, will be more than happy to respond to your questions. We would love to connect with you after this webinar to hear your thoughts and to hear your reactions or questions you might have for our study. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Rachel, do we have any questions that we need to respond to?
No questions, but we'll just pause for a second. We do have a little bit more than 10 minutes remaining. So if you have any other questions from Manolia, Tom, or Carla, please share those. You all have had such thoughtful, wonderful questions throughout. So we'll just take a minute for any additional questions.
Thank you. And these questions, we would like to, maybe we can share in our follow-up email as well, so we can hear from everyone in terms of how you are thinking about the findings. How much do you honor youth voice? How do you avoid mentors to help them avoid the fixing reflex? Your experiences with academic versus behavioral needs. So let us know.
Okay, we've got a question from John. Did you look at youth experience of prescription?
Would that be drug prescription?
Yeah, John, I don't know if you can pop into our chat here a little bit more about your question.
He might mean prescriptive mentoring, like trying to change the youth, kind of the old Moro and styles. I'm not sure, John, if that's what you mean. Might want to see if I can type in there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, prescriptive. We built the criticism outcome, the relationship quality criticism scale, to kind of try to reflect that, this child is experiencing something that feels like criticism. They're feeling like this person is trying to change them in some way. So that's probably the closest thing we have, was that, and that was, I think that was different for conduct, right, Manolia? That one was one of the ones that you
Right.
were rated higher on criticism.
So actually, I think we have two things that could address this. One, is this established criticism and conflict scale that we reported on, but we also had some questions that we created for the MEDP project, asking mentees questions like, I feel like my mentor is pushing me to do things.
That's the one I was thinking, Tom. You're right. Yep.
Because the idea behind MEDP was that the mentor would do more teaching and advocacies. And so we wanted to see if that was being forced. And so we do have, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 questions that we're trying to get a sense of, like, was the mentee comfortable with that, or did they feel like the mentor was driving things in a different way because they kept harping on the same things.
That's right, Tom. That's the one we made up. We did not make up conflict. That one was established. You're right. You're right. That one was push, mentor push that we made up. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks to our panel for that, tag teaming the answer. Any other questions that folks have that they want to share? Any reactions to these questions that we're hearing here? Okay, great. Next question, is it fair to consider mentoring as likely more effective as prevention versus intervention, except academics?
I think that's a tough question to answer. It's important to remember that the programs that we studied in this big study were all these non-targeted programs. So there are lots of really wonderful targeted programs that are more intervention. They're more focused. So that wasn't our question. Our sample is really kind of more friendship-based programs. So it's a hard one to answer. Manolia, you might have a different angle on that.
I don't know if I'd have the answer to that, but I think it's a great conversation, because do we see these mentoring programs as prevention or preventing future problems, as the mentors are providing this protective factor or this protective relationship that can serve as a buffer for future problems? Or are we thinking about mentoring relationships as a way to intervene as the youth are coming with some serious problems? And as Carla mentioned, we had, these programs were non-targeted, and they also recruited or accepted youth with very different levels of needs, which means for some youth, the mentoring relationship served more as interventive or as an intervention strategy, versus for some youth, it was more like a prevention strategy, right, preventing them from engaging in more serious behaviors in the future.
So I would say that that slide that showed mentors typically focus most on helping to make the youth happy, things like that. That's probably closely aligned with what caregivers and youth want and why they're coming to the mentoring programs. I think when we talk to the caregivers, you hear answers like, I want my child to have fun and go out in the community and have new experiences and have a friend and a role model. And there are some cases where, youth are being referred by teachers or counselors, or the parent has a real concern about the youth, going down a certain path and they want to prevent something. But I think that those ideas about prevention and intervention and these kinds of outcomes are often what the funders and the programs want. I think that sometimes maybe there's really great alignment between what caregivers and youth are looking for and what mentors are focusing on in terms of, just positive experiences and maybe a break from some of the challenges and counseling and pressures that are in the rest of their life. So yeah, I mean, I wish we could emphasize more just the having a strong relationship, addresses other needs like, preventing social isolation or loneliness or things like that. And just that our outcomes for mentoring could be more realistic for what, 3 hours a week can do.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question and this conversation and I remember we talked about this with the participants and with the mentor-mentee pair who supported our practice brief. I remember exactly from the mentor who said, I do not focus on the youth problem until I really feel comfortable in my relationship with the youth, because all other people are focusing on the youth problem anyway. So that should not be my role as a mentor. So really, I think bringing in that aspect of relationship as a mentor might be really key here. This is a really interesting conversation.
I want to lift up a question from Esther in the chat. I don't know if our panelists will be able to answer that, but is the prevention aspect the goal for OJJDP? Esther asks.
Yeah, definitely. In the original study, the ultimate youth outcomes were things like delinquency or problem behaviors. And that's important. We don't want to see kids having issues in those areas. But that is something we measured. We tried to also get some of these assets that we mentioned, but other things that could be happening in the mentoring relationship. But John, I'll just highlight that this was what we're talking about today is a secondary analysis of the original MEDP data. I think that MEDP had more questions about what is really happening in the relationship, what mentors are focusing on, than most studies. So it's maybe one of the best data sets to try to zero in on whether there's a match between what youth need and what mentors are doing. But if you were designing the study with that intention, I think there are ways to.
I think we're losing your audio. Will you speak up a little bit?
Oh, I think, yeah, if we were designing a new study to look at this tailoring phenomenon, I think we would focus more on, the types of activities that mentors are doing and the approaches they're taking, things like that. Our question was very broad, like, are you addressing it? It is just one item. So yeah, we could definitely have more questions to unpack what's happening in the relationship.
Well, we are just about at our time. Thank you so much to our panelists and all of you for your great questions. Any final thoughts or questions? Happy to address any that we can't quite address in our follow-up if anyone has any burning questions they want to ask. Okay, well, hearing none, we'll let everybody go. Thank you so much to Manolia, Tom, and Carla for joining us today and sharing more about this work. Thank you all for your great questions. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides as a follow-up to today, as well as some resources and links that we shared in the chat. You'll also get Manolia's contact information so you can continue your conversation offline. And then the recording of today's webinar will be available through the National Mentoring Resource Center. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Be on the lookout for upcoming NMRC research webinars in the coming months. We hope that you can join us there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.